Good Friday, the 4th of April, 1980. When Rosie was born in 1948, her parents had doted on her for about 3 weeks. Then they got bored. They'd met at the end of the war. Her father, Ron, was an American, an Air Force officer, square-jawed and handsome. Her mother, Stella, was a spoiled little rich girl from a family who owned a chain of grocery stores. Ron hadn't wanted to go back to the US after the war because he knew that any job he'd find would never match the glamour of his life in the Air Force. He loved the thrill of amphetamine-fueled raids over Europe and the casual sex on offer in the quaint little clubs of England's green and pleasant land. Stella's money, or at least her father's money, offered a life of idle luxury. Their marriage was tempestuous, because that was the way they both liked it. They fought bitterly, and their quarrels usually ended in ferocious sex. After a couple of years, they'd exhausted each other, and they both drifted into casual relationships with other people. When Stella fell pregnant, they thought that a child might put something back into the marriage. It didn't. They farmed Rosie out to anyone who'd have her. Then, when Rosie was 18 months, Stella took off with a lover, and Ron, realising that he wouldn't get anything else out of his father-in-law, went back to the States. Rosie's grandparents paid for her to be cared for by a series of foreign housemates. Some of them beat her. Then they paid for her to go to one of the less expensive boarding schools. As she grew wild and fearful and crazy with loneliness. She was hopeless at her lessons, but she excelled at art. Her teacher, Miss Marjorie Clues, was amazed at Rosie's precocious talent. She encouraged her and showed her books of paintings. Miss Clues effused over Picasso and raved about Rembrandt. It was the only time Rosie had known kindness and interest from an adult. Her painting and drawing was as dark as it was compulsive. She drew anywhere and with anything she could lay her hands on. Her art was a way for her to exercise the sense of abandonment and rejection in her damaged heart. When Miss Clues announced that she was leaving the school to work abroad, Rosie stole a powder compact from her handbag so that she'd have a way of remembering that people could be kind. At 17, Rosie started taking amphetamines. They gave her a cold, hard, uncaring edge against a bitter world. They also gave her the ability to stay awake all night and draw. When she was 18, her grandfather paid for her to get a flat in London and gave her a small allowance. This she spent on paint and speed. Then, in the summer of love, she met James. When Rosie first saw him, he was playing an acoustic guitar and singing like a rolling stone outside Leicester Square tube station. She'd stopped and listened, and then put a crumpled pound note into his hat. He looked up through his curtain of long hair and smiled, and the warmth of that smile surrounded Rosie like a summer breeze. They went for coffee, then back to Rosie's flat, where she showed James her paintings. He thought them astounding and wonderful. They made love on the floor. James moved in. He bought a paper bag with another shirt in and a toothbrush. Sometimes James injected himself with heroin. When he did that and they made love, Rosie felt his tenderness for her so intense and beautiful that it made her cry. Sometimes they took LSD, tasting and smelling each other and making art together. Their love was deep and precious, and the desert that was Rosie's heart bloomed sumptuous in greens and golds. They lived like this for 2 years. James wrote songs and Rosie painted pictures. She loved huge canvases and filled them with scenes from her head and from her life and from the street outside the door. James wrote a song for her called Deep read Rosie, on account of the colour he always saw when they tripped. Trouble lay ahead. Supermarkets had started to emerge on the high streets, and her grandfather's grocery stores were losing money. They couldn't compete. Rosie's allowance was near the top of the list of things that could be dispensed with. By 1970, Rosie and James were broke. They couldn't pay the rent, and they got evicted from their flat. It was summer, so at first they slept in parks and under bridges. Rosie painted a living room on the bricks, and they lived there until autumn turned to winter. Then they stayed on people's floors and sofas. Rosie couldn't paint. James earned some money from busking and occasional gigs in pubs. Rosie would stand and watch him, and when he looked at her right through the crowd, she knew that she was loved. In a pub in Camden Town, they met Roger, an old school friend of James. He had a house in Hebden Bridge, an old mill town in Yorkshire. Hippies had drifted up there and squatted in the dwellings, deserted after the mills and factories of the industrial age had closed down. Roger asked James and Rosie to go to his house, an underdwelling he called it, and take care of it while he went to renovate a barn in Provence. They took down the address and caught the train the following day. Rosie loved the house, in its higgledy-piggledy street, hanging onto the edge of a deep gorge. She painted again. She painted the walls in great murals, and her neighbours came and asked her to paint their houses too. And when she finished the insides, she painted the outsides in camouflage against the valley side, as if the very houses had fused with nature. One night when James was out, Rosie found a bag of heroin and a syringe. Knowing her fragility, he'd always kept his stash hidden from her. This night, he'd been careless. Rosie's curiosity and her artist's need to fathom all human experience finally overcame her fear. She needed to know how James felt when he took it, and to show him the intensity in their lovemaking that he showed her. She sat on the edge of the bath, tied a rag around her arm and injected it into her vein. She vomited, and then she knew. When James came home, he lifted her from the bathroom floor and carried her to bed. After that night, they both took heroin every day. When they couldn't get it, they argued and fought. When Roger came home from France, the house was such a mess that he threw them out and called them fucking junkies. They went to sleep rough in the city, where they could get heroin more easily, and they put their names on the council list. Rosie got pregnant, and the council gave them a flat in one of the new high-rise blocks. The baby was born an addict, and a woman from social services lifted her from Rosie's track-marked arms. Eventually, James' veins collapsed in his arms, and he started to inject into his groin and legs. His right leg became infected, and gangrene set in. He nearly died, but Rosie called an ambulance in the nick of time, and although they managed to save him, the doctors had to amputate a leg. After that, James rarely went out. Rosie paid for their addiction by selling her poor emaciated body on the street outside the flats. Though it was only April, the day had been hot like summer. Usually it rained on bank holidays, especially up north. Rosie didn't paint much anymore. There seemed to be no need. Yet this day, something felt different. Her old compulsion seemed to thrum in every cell of her body, and she just had to paint. Rosie searched in the electricity meter cupboard, found a can of black acrylic spray paint and put it in her bag. Rosie helped James to dress and brushed his tangled hair, and then she kissed him before she went out. It was twilight and still warm. On the wall opposite the refuse area, she began to paint. The picture was so big that she had to stand on one of the bins to reach the top. When she finished, Rosie threw the empty can into an open bin and went out on the street by the factories. She waited on the curb, feeling sick and shaky and in need of her medicine. The man in blue overalls seemed to come from nowhere. He offered her £10 to go with him into the derelict factory. She thought that she'd seen him before. He pushed the old broken door open and let Rosie lead the way in. Something metallic clunked in his overall pocket as he walked. And then she heard a sound, like pebbles crunching on a beach. It was her skull cracking and caving inward. Graham savaged her and tore at her body until it was bloody. She was already dead by the time he pushed her jumper up and exposed her tiny breasts. Then he pulled her jeans and knickers down her thighs, raked her with a screwdriver, and used his Stanley knife to slice open her belly. Quenched then, and breathing hard, he stood and looked down at his work. Next to her, on the old concrete floor, her bag gaped, similarly open. Graham stooped to rifle through it and dumped out its jumbled contents. A powder compact caught his arm. He picked it up and kept it. Graham rolled the slight broken body under an old workbench with a casual heel of his foot, stripped off his bloody overalls, wrapped his tools up inside them, and jogged back to his car. Then he drove home to surprise his wife. He bought her a huge Easter egg earlier, the biggest in the shop, and he was looking forward to seeing her expression when he presented it to her.